Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The house is on fire. That's the title of this session. And I will start with a lot of bad news. And I know you shouldn't. You should always communicate in a positive fashion. But before I speak about the solution, I want to talk briefly about the problem. While we speak last weekend at the entrance of the Barents Sea, Arctic Ocean, the temperature was at 29 degrees. That's the temperature of your holiday destination. That is not what you would expect at the Arctic Sea. That is unusual, but it's also very bad news because this is an area where the soil is permanently frozen and it starts to thaw. That's not only wrecking the infrastructure, that is releasing enormous amounts of methane, and methane is a very potent climate driver. So we are in a situation which we have feared years ago, that we are coming into a feedback loop where climate change is accelerating. The same news is what we actually got from the latest report from IPCC, and IPCC is our scientific advisory body that gives us all the hard facts that we need for political decision-making. 10 years ago was not only the start of the global fashion agenda, it was also the Copenhagen Climate Conference. And while many things did not work in Copenhagen at that time, one thing did work. The countries of this world agreed that the safe limit to climate change, to global warming, that is actually at the heart of our convention that I'm representing here, that this safe level would be not more than 2 degrees centigrade 10 years ago. Today we are at roughly 1 degree centigrade, and every single day, you hear about a climate-induced crisis. You have wildfires in Sweden. That didn't happen before. You got extended droughts. You got a heat wave in Russia. Every day, if you watch the news with open eyes, you see the next climate crisis. So is 2 degrees really a safe level? No, it is not. We are already past 1 degree, and this is not a safe level. So IPCC, our scientific advisory board, tells us in no uncertain terms that we need to stay below 1.5 degrees. And for that, we have a window of 12 years. Or recently in Forbes magazine, not really a Greenpeace publication, Forbes said 5 years. Maybe it's 6 years, maybe it's 7, but time is running out. Now, what I want to talk to you about is not a business decision. A business decision is you go down this route or you go down that route, and it might be right, it might be wrong, and you can fix it later. There is no choice here. We have to fix this problem because our planet is on fire. And no matter whether we agree or disagree, or we are in this business or that business, or public people or diplomats or whatever, we all share this spaceship. It's the only place we have. We can maybe put 3 or 4 people in space for a limited period of time, but not 7 billion. So we are all passengers on this spaceship, and we need to keep our planet in place. 2 days ago, there was a submarine going into the trench of St. Marianne, which is the lowest point on this planet, 11 kilometers deep in the ocean. What did they find? Plastic trash. There is not one place on this planet which is still untouched by human beings. This is why geologists call this the Anthropocene, the age of the man. Why? Because we are more influencing nature than nature itself. So that's a lot of power, and many of our ancestors have dreamt for so many years to master nature. Now we do, but that comes with the responsibility to manage that. Now I'm speaking to fashion people. Fashion, and that's the bad news, is part of the problem. Don't nail me on numbers, roughly 10% of the global CO2 emissions. That's already pretty big. That's 3 times air travel. But it can be addressed. And if you look at where your emissions are coming from, the biggest part of it is actually the sourcing, the fiber, the leather, all of the tier 3 emissions. Now let me come to one thing, completely unrelated and then not. Every day of the year there is some international day of this and that. Today is the International Day of Families. Now what has that to do with fashion? Well, 80% of the world's food is produced by smallholder family farmers. millions of them, everyone small, but together an enormous force. These are the same people who, to a large extent, provide you with the raw materials for fashion. And here we see a disconnect. You got the big fashion, the big brands, you got the small people who are struggling to survive. And just to say, who are suffering more under climate change than anybody else and have not contributed to the problem. So if we can link this side, the sourcing, with the other side, where actually the material is coming from, in a meaningful way, we can not only address climate change, we can also address social issues, and we can give hope and a perspective, and yes, love to the people who actually need it most. How are we doing that? Well, 2 words I want to say. One is radical cooperation. We need a level of cooperation that has not existed before. And that means cooperation between brands that are actually competing for a market share. And we need a sense of togetherness to address that. Now, I'm very happy that with the global fashion agenda, we found a very powerful partner to drive an industry-led initiative on fashion, the Fashion Charter for Climate Action, which has been presented at our Global Climate Conference last year in Katowice in Poland. And I'm happy to say it was one of the most publicized events at our Conference of the Parties. That's the name of our conference. And it really made an impact. And now let me come to the positive side. The positive side of fashion is dreams. It's visual, it's emotional. It was said so often this morning, the decision to buy fashion is not a rational one. It's an emotional one. You fall in love, you identify with a brand. A brand is a lifestyle. You can basically tell people whether they are more having a sport lifestyle or more elegant by the fashion, by the things that they wear. And this is where the place that I'm representing, the United Nations, is so terribly bad at. We are publicizing data and reports, and they are long and they are complicated to read, but we don't speak to the hearts, we don't speak to the emotions. So yes, we want to work with you to make your production more sustainable. But we would also need you and love to work with you in getting the hearts of the people and finally making people understand what that is, and that there is a sustainable future which is attractive, which you want to have, which you want to be a part of, and to be a place where you want your children to grow up. And there, fashion can do what we can't, reaching out to the imagination. Let me conclude, before I introduce my 2 fellow panelists, with one thing. We are talking a lot about renewable energy. And fashion is running since day one on the biggest renewable energy there is, and that's human creativity. And we need your creativity, we need your imagination, and I'm talking specifically to the creative in the room. Use your minds, use your imagination, really to make fashion sustainable. Now, I spoke about the fashion agenda, the fashion charter. The fashion charter is an industry-led initiative. It has a steering committee, and I'm very happy to have the chair and the vice chair of that steering committee. And we are going to immediately discuss with the 2 of you about how that works in practice. But let me introduce Laila Petrie from WWF. She is the global lead for the fashion sector. And Stefan Seidel, who is the global sustainability lead for Puma. And I'm taking a seat now. Thank you very much. And will ask immediately. Thank you. Laila, about the urgency of all of that. Now, we start to address it with the fashion charter. Is it timely? Is it enough? Does it solve the problem?
I mean, it's definitely timely, maybe over time. I think it's an amazing start. So what we have is, we have a strong charter, we have a great group that's come together. We've heard a lot today about cross-industry collaboration, collaboration with other kinds of stakeholders, and this platform is designed to do just that. So to not just work with brands, but also work with manufacturers, work with industry institutions, to work with governments potentially, because that's often one of the really important levers to work on. And I think the other thing that's really helpful is that the charter itself is engineered so that it's going to look towards a 1.5-degree solution. So we have 7 working groups working on things like raw materials, logistics, policy, financial solutions, all of which are active, practical working groups that really are designed to generate solutions and map out what currently exists and really amplify that to make sure that we can build a pathway to a decarbonised fashion industry that's in line with the Paris Agreement. So I think if we really keep the pace up, if we get enough resources and we get good critical mass in the industry, then this really does have the power to meet the demands.
Well, thanks very much. Stefan, the biggest news in climate change activism are the young people who are striking every Friday, Fridays for Future, and they're getting so much traction. And it makes me personally happy to see that slowly they're bringing their grandparents and their parents on the street. But let's talk about these kids. That's the next generation of your customers. And they ask very inconvenient questions. Is the fashion industry prepared for that generation of customers?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. Those are our customers already, and they're growing, of course, into our customers. And what they have done with their Inspiring Fridays for Future protests is that they have also brought the topic on the forefront of the agenda, something that politicians and scientists have tried to do for a long time and have not been able to do. I've read 2 days ago in a big German newspaper as a part of the opinion poll to the European elections that climate change is now the first prominent topic that all age groups in several countries are interested in. So that has surpassed, for example, migration and other topics. So I think that is also due to Fridays for Future. And what does it tell us as businesses and as the fashion industry, of course, is that, yes, we need to take this serious. I mean, we have taken it serious before. That's why the Fashion Charter is already there. That's why we have already launched the Fashion Charter last December. Probably we should have done it 5 years ago, but better late than never. It's there. We have a critical mass of signatories. Most of the big brands are already part of it. We have good civil society and other organizations who have joined. So yes, I would urge any business, in not only in our industry, but particularly also in our industry, if you have not made your climate strategy, if you have not sort of started to embark on this climate journey, then now it's time to join the Fashion Charter, and you know, we have to do this together. Collaboration, you mentioned collaboration, this morning was mentioned collaboration. Of course, we can only do it together. And we've started the journey, but yeah, we're not there yet, but I think we're on a good way.
And actually, Martin, the UN is convening this platform, but can you speak a little bit to the fact that, you know, you can also maybe reach out to other kinds of stakeholders than brands are used to engaging with?
Yeah, well, the UN is obviously working with member states. Our parties to the process are sovereign states. But for us, it's completely clear that the states cannot deliver what they pledged to do in Paris unless the private sector is on board. So for me, the Fashion Charter is also an example of sectoral engagement. And what we can do with this sectoral engagement is quite simply, we put you on a global stage, we let you shine, we give you an audience, and we connect you to the policymakers and the negotiators. And that's important because if you put yourself in the skin of a diplomat or a minister, these people have had the last contact with any sort of different sector. Maybe years back, their idea of how fashion is being produced might have been formed when they were 18 or 19. So it's really important for us to have this feedback loop from the industry saying, we actually can do that. And what I hope to get out of that is a push and pull. If the industry can say, look, we can do that, but we need your support for regulations, for a taxing environment, for investing, for risk-taking and all of that, then you can, A, back up the politicians who need to take the decisions, because It is so much easier when you know your industry is behind you and is not criticizing you for killing jobs. And at the same time, we are the place in which we do global norm setting. So this give and take, this osmosis between the negotiators and the actual private sector is something that I think is extremely helpful. But I wanted to ask one thing back, which is in the Fashion Charter, you got some of the really globally known brands. Is that exclusive to global brands? Can you sign up when we are calling in the audience to become a part of the Charter? Is that open? What do I have to do to become a member? And that to Stefan or to Laila, who wants to?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe I can take that question. Of course, it's not a closed shop. That's why we're talking about it here. It has been open from the very beginning. The documents to sign up are on the website of UNFCCC, which has gladly provided a specific website to that. There is some commitments you have to make as a signatory. So, for example, if you're a brand, you have to commit to a certain reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, in a certain time frame. You have to commit to work on your material choices. You have to commit to report on your greenhouse gas emissions frequently. And you have to commit to get active in one of the 7 working groups. Other than that, if you get your CEO's signature and send it to your organization, everybody is welcome. The charter signatories, we have over 60 now, is very diverse. We have small brands, we have big brands, we have suppliers from all around the world. We have civil society organizations. So, yeah, everybody's welcome as long, of course, there is a connection to the fashion industry. We also have a bank who recently joined HSBC. We have Maersk, one of the biggest logistics service providers. So it is a relatively open format.
Well, and I think so. I've been kind of getting people's reactions to the Charter more in informal discussions. And some of the things I've heard is it just a talking shop? Do I have to already have the answers and be ready to commit before I join? Is it really going to deliver anything? And I actually think the answer to all of those is it's not like you have to come with ready-made solutions. So it's not like you have to know how to get there before you sign up. Actually, the idea is no matter where you are on the journey, it's about enabling you to achieve that. So, you know, although you have to be willing to commit to an aspiration, we're not going to start policing your baseline right away. It's much more, join the Charter, we'll work together to do things like figure out the best data that we should all use for measurement, figure out, you know, what our process should be for reporting and how we're going to support not just big brands, but smaller actors and, you know, manufacturers and lots of different types of actors to commit to these targets. And then the working groups themselves should really generate practical outcomes. So it's not just you have to contribute to those working groups, although obviously that's great, and contribution in kind, contribution directly in terms of funding, all those things are really, really helpful. But I think in the end, those groups should deliver back to not just platform members, but to the industry. The raw materials group is designed to help scale up solutions to more sustainable raw materials and help us measure those solutions. The policy group is there to help facilitate the connection between the different types of actors to talk about the role of regulation. So don't feel like there's a lot of barriers to joining. Actually, the platform itself is designed to try and take away those barriers and to only do the work once as an industry so that then everybody can just take the action that they want to take rather than wasting time trying to figure out the landscape and what the right approach should be.
Well, thank you. I mentioned in my short intervention that you really need to go down deep in the value chain to hit the biggest part of the emissions. Is that realistic? How deep can you go? How much responsibility can a fashion brand take for the suppliers? Does it go to the mills? Does it go further down? What can you realistically do, and what would the Charter do to address that?
So when we prepared the Charter, we mapped the sort of life cycle of the product. And of course, we did start with raw materials, which is why there is a raw material commitment, and there is also a raw material working group. Then it goes on to manufacturing, and of course, manufacturing, especially the mills, the tier 2, the wet processing, are essential. And what makes me optimistic is that we already have tools out there. I think it was Paul Bowman this morning, who said, we don't need new technology, we just need to apply it. So we have run, for example, from Puma, we have run energy efficiency programs over the last 10 years. All of them were positive in creating a good return on investment besides saving energy and therefore also carbon emissions. And we're not alone, there's others. There's ready-made programs out there. There's the Clean by Design program, for example, which has just started another cycle. IFC has set up programs in Vietnam and Bangladesh. The problem I see, or I have seen so far with those programs, is that there have been 5 suppliers here and 10 suppliers there and maybe 20 here. We need to add a couple of zeros to the number of those suppliers to really scale up. And what also makes me optimistic, for example, is that SINTAC, the Chinese National Textile Association, has joined the charter. So if we can convince the national federations, industry federations, to scale up and then reach hundreds and thousands eventually of suppliers, with the solutions that are already out there, then we can really make an impact. And we need to make an impact. And of course, we can't stop with energy efficiency. We need to transform into renewable energy. And there as well, we see picking up, for example, in Vietnam, we've just had 3 suppliers who are investing now into 2 megawatt-hour peak photovoltaic. They would not do that, photovoltaic power generation, they would not do that if there wasn't a business case. We have seen the cost of renewable energy going down versus the conventional energy costs sort of being stable. There is even a business case now, so we need to pull all our efforts together and make it happen and make it happen fast.
Right. Laila, that is what's happening in practice with the members of the Charter, or...
Can I answer the question? Because I'm all pent up with it. So, because I think this is something we were discussing sort of today a little bit, is, I think people are over and reliant on the narrative that it's like, it's up to global brands to work down their supply chain, to push their suppliers to do certain things. That's important, but absolutely, like, more of a landscape-driven approach is in the end the thing that's going to deliver the change, because we work not just with the suppliers of our corporate partners, we also try and come in and say, okay, who in this landscape is having the biggest impacts? And often they're not connected easily identifiably to these big brands, and the incentives get lost on the way down to them, even if they are. And their interests may not just be saving money, although that's helpful. Sometimes it's political kind of elements. They want to look good with a certain stakeholder. They want certain guarantees from their intermediate customer. They're worried about certain risks at site level, and if I change my operations, won't that disrupt my operations? So there's lots and lots of factors that are really important for those sites that are not necessarily the ones that you see with the bigger, more able manufacturers. So I think it's really important to not, just say it's up to the brands to drive down their value chains, but say it's up to us to work in these countries that we know are key production regions, to really roll out at a landscape level, working with industry associations, working with policymakers, and bringing in financial solutions that actually work for them, rather than assuming what will work for them. Sorry, I really wanted to answer that question.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes left, and I just want to ask, because we really want to have as many of you signing up to the Fashion Charter as possible. And we know that there is so much demand and so many initiatives asking for your attention. What's in it for a member? What do you actually do? What do you get out if you become a member of the Charter? How do you practically engage? Maybe Stefan, 30 seconds, and Laila.
It's the leading industry organization on climate change. You will find all the big brands there. You will find all the big sustainability-minded organizations of the industry. We need to collaborate. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to start new organizations or sort of fragment. We need to pull our efforts together to create positive impact on the ground fast.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the industry hates duplication, it hates, diversification of our resources, and everybody wants to pull things together. On climate, this is the place where things pull together. So if you want to join the conversation on how we roll out climate solutions in this sector, this should be the place that we have those discussions. Because in order to succeed, we really need to make sure that we collaborate as much as possible and as coherently as possible across the whole industry.
And if I can add, if you're dealing with an issue that can only be solved by 7 billion people together, using the brand and using your outreach and the advertising has a huge impact. If people learn also from brands that they trust, that there is a possibility to counter climate change, that there is a possibility to engage, that is worth a lot. Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking our panelists, Laila and Stefan, for all of their work with the Charter.
Thanks for having us.